She was hired to blend into the background, a plain new bodyguard with nothing remarkable except the steadiness in her eyes. He had rejected supermodels, actresses, and heiresses without a second thought. But the first time she stepped between him and danger, something cold in him cracked.
All right, let's jump back into the story. Welcome back, my incredible family and friends. If you love stories that stir your emotions and stay with you long after they're over, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your messages. I've got another unforgettable story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's continue. Gideon Vance lived by one conviction: control was survival. Control built Vance Tech from the ashes of a childhood marked by scarcity. Control kept enemies at bay. Control ensured no one ever got close enough to hurt him again. At sunrise, while most of the city still yawned awake, the top-floor corner office was already alive with muted screens. Gideon stood over a spread of confidential security reports, sleeves rolled up, precision in every movement. His assistant, Nora, lingered nearby with the cautious ease of someone who respected the dangerous sharpness of his focus. "Gideon," she began softly, "this is the third targeted breach in 30 days. He didn't look up. We've handled worse. Not with this level of internal access, Nora countered gently. Someone out there knows your routines too well. That made him pause. Barely. Just enough to acknowledge the threat. The board wants your personal detail expanded. More specialists, more protection. Gideon dragged his gaze from the report to her. I don't need more bodies. I need competence. And lately, competence had been a rare commodity. One guard caught flirting with him during a press conference, another sharing his location online, another too intimidated to step between him and danger. Gideon didn't have the patience for unprofessionalism, or for people who saw his face, his wealth, or his status instead of the risk he carried every day. The last round of candidates are here, Nora said, then hesitated. One of them is a woman. The agency said she's exceptional. Gideon raised an eyebrow. You know I prefer no distractions. They said she wouldn't be, Nora insisted. He said nothing. She took it as permission to bring the candidates in. Moments later, quiet, measured footsteps approached the office. Mr. Vance, Nora announced. This is Reese Calder. Gideon looked up, and the world shifted. Reese didn't walk in with the glamour of the women who usually found excuses to enter his orbit. Her dark auburn hair was braided simply, her uniform clean and fitted, her face free of cosmetics. Plain, some might say. But Gideon saw what mattered. Her stance was grounded, her gaze was steady, her energy was balanced and unreadably calm. She stood like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything under control. You don't look like a bodyguard, Gideon said, testing her. Reese's response was instant, steady. And you don't look like someone who sleeps well at night.
Nora stiffened. Gideon almost smiled. Interesting. Reese didn't shift, didn't fidget, didn't shrink. She simply existed in quiet command of herself, and that alone made her presence feel larger than the room. Sit, he ordered. I prefer to stand, sir. Gideon studied her. Most candidates arrived desperate to impress him. Reese Calder simply stayed present, undistracted by his reputation, his wealth, or the way he analyzed every inch of her posture. He folded his arms. "Why should I hire you?" She didn't brag. She didn't list credentials. Her voice was cool, stable. "You're being targeted by someone who understands your patterns, someone patient, someone who knows you believe control makes you untouchable." Gideon's eyes sharpened. "You assessed that how?" "In the first 10 seconds. He stepped closer. "Based on what?" Reese matched his gaze, not confrontational, not submissive, simply steady. "You run your life with precision. Men who rely on structure are predictable. Predictable men attract enemies who wait for the perfect hole in their routine." Nora covered her mouth. Gideon didn't move, but inside, something cracked. Interest, irritation, intrigue, he wasn't sure. "You're very direct," he said. "That's part of the job, Mr. Vance." Gideon stepped even closer, close enough to catch the controlled rhythm of her breathing. She didn't waver, not even a millimeter. Who was this woman? "Thank you, Miss Calder," he said quietly. "We'll be in touch." Reese nodded once, turned, and left without a backward glance. No attempt to charm him. No attempt to read him. No attempt to linger. She walked out like the moment didn't affect her at all. And that, more than her posture, her words, or her presence, made Gideon's jaw tighten. Nora approached hesitantly. "Your thoughts?" His eyes stayed fixed on the door. "Hire her." Nora blinked. "Even though—" "Hire her again," he said. Nora nodded. "Consider it done." But she didn't understand what Gideon did. Reese Calder wasn't a distraction. She was a problem he suddenly wanted to understand.
The first assignment wasn't glamorous. A high-profile donor gala, crowded, glittering, and dangerous in ways no one expected. Sterling, no, Gideon Vance had underestimated the threat once before. He wouldn't again. Reese Calder walked beside him as they entered the grand hall, her posture alert but calm. The crowd barely noticed her. That was exactly how she wanted it. Her eyes scanned every corner, exits, ceilings, potential hazards. She didn't glance at the chandeliers or the designer gowns, only the threats mattered. Gideon felt it immediately, that silent awareness, the way she moved without arrogance, but with precision. It unsettled him. Most people attending his events were either fawning or calculating. Reese was neither. She was steady. The first hour passed uneventfully. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, and whispered compliments about his wealth. Reese stayed at his side, scanning, predicting, moving imperceptibly to block potential gaps in security. Gideon almost didn't notice her. Almost. Then the central event happened. A man in a tailored tuxedo approached the stage. His movements were casual, confident. His eyes flicked to Gideon, not with admiration, not with curiosity, but with intent. Something in his posture screamed threat. Reese's hand brushed Gideon's elbow, a subtle, almost imperceptible warning. He turned toward her, eyebrow raised. She didn't speak. She only tilted her head slightly toward the man. That was all it took. Gideon's pulse accelerated. Every instinct screamed danger, but he didn't panic. Not yet. Reese had him calm in a way no one ever had. Her presence grounded him. And it wasn't just her competence, it was the quiet confidence, the way her eyes never wavered, even when they locked on potential disaster. He followed her subtle cues. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture.
They moved as one, her scanning, his positioning, every step intentional. Then the man made his move. He stepped closer to the stage where Gideon would speak in a few moments. His hand dipped into his coat. Reese's hand shot out before anyone noticed, grabbing Gideon's wrist and pulling him back. In the same instant, the man's sleeve brushed the microphone stand and triggered a small explosion of sparks. Chaos erupted. Guests screamed, pushing away from the stage. Waiters dropped trays. Security guards scrambled. And through it all, Reese guided Gideon toward the side exit, her grip firm, but not panicked. She didn't look at him. She only looked at the threat, analyzing escape routes, checking windows, doors, and hidden corners. They emerged into a private hallway, hearts racing, but controlled. Gideon exhaled sharply, finally allowing himself to glance at her. "You saved me," he said, voice low, almost uncharacteristically vulnerable. Reese looked at him for a fraction of a second, then away. "That's my job. No one else should have to get hurt because of me."
He studied her. The tremor in her fingers was barely visible, the faintest tension in her shoulders. She didn't need to speak to tell him she had been fully aware of the risk. She had chosen to act anyway. Gideon had faced threats before. He had been attacked, betrayed, and cornered countless times. Yet none of those experiences had left him feeling anything close to what he felt now. Relief, awe, and fascination, all bundled into one tight knot in his chest. "Most people," he said carefully, "would panic. You didn't." "I don't panic," Reese replied evenly. "I assess and act." Her words were simple, almost cold. Yet something in the way she said them made Gideon realize that beneath the composed exterior, there was a depth of courage he had rarely witnessed. For a moment, silence hung between them. The hallway smelled faintly of polished marble and the lingering perfume of the gala. Gideon felt the weight of her presence more than he had ever felt anyone else's. And then he did something impulsive, something he almost immediately regretted. He reached out and lightly touched her arm. Reese froze for the briefest instant, registering the contact. Her eyes met his, sharp and questioning. "That's unnecessary," she said. "It's not," Gideon murmured, not letting go, but not pressing further. "I need to know you're real, that you're here, that you actually exist, and I'm not imagining this calm, this precision." Reese studied him, expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded once, acknowledging the truth in his words without admitting it out loud. The sirens in the distance grew louder. Security backup was on the way. The gala was chaos, but they were safe for the moment. Yet Gideon couldn't stop thinking about the way her hand had steadied his elbow, the way her eyes had calculated every possible move without hesitation. "Most women in my world," he said carefully, "would try to impress me. You didn't." Her lips quirked slightly, not quite a smile. "Impressing you would be dangerous." He almost laughed. Almost, but the sound stuck in his throat. Instead, he simply nodded, feeling the weight of a strange, unfamiliar emotion building inside him. Respect, admiration, maybe even something like longing. Then the first emotional spark hit him fully. Fear. Not fear for himself, fear for her. "You risked yourself," he said softly. "And for what? A stranger?" "I risked myself for a job," she said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less." The clarity, the honesty, the lack of manipulation, it was intoxicating. Gideon had been surrounded by beautiful, charming, clever women his entire life, yet none had ever made him feel the sharp, honest pull he felt right now. He wanted to ask her more, to understand her better, to see why she was different. But there was no time. "Let's move," he said, gently taking the lead toward the emergency stairwell. "Backup will arrive in 2 minutes." As they descended, their proximity was close enough that Gideon could feel her shoulder brush against his. Not flirtation, not intimacy, just coordination. And yet the sensation stirred something deep in him, something he had buried long ago. By the time they emerged outside, the gala was overrun with police and additional security. Guests were being ushered to safety. But Gideon didn't move until he glanced at Reese, standing calm and unwavering beside him. He realized something in that instant. He hadn't just been impressed by her skill. He had been drawn to her courage, her focus, her very presence. And he hated the fact that she didn't belong to his world. She wasn't someone he could buy or control. She wasn't like the rest. And that was the dangerous part. Now I want you to imagine this. If you were Reese, standing next to a man like Gideon during a life-threatening moment, would you let yourself feel admiration or keep it strictly professional? Comment below with your choice.
The morning after the gala, Reese Calder walked into Vance Tech headquarters as if nothing had happened. Her ponytail swung neatly behind her, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. Yet every step was calculated, every breath measured. The adrenaline from last night's near disaster had faded, replaced by something she refused to acknowledge, a lingering awareness of Gideon Vance. He hadn't contacted her directly, which she both expected and appreciated. Yet she knew he would be watching her, silent, precise, assessing. Gideon always assessed. That was his way. That was who he was. Inside his office, Gideon leaned back in the leather chair, watching the security monitors. Every hallway, every stairwell, every entrance and exit flickered on the screens. His mind should have been entirely focused on logistics, protocols, and potential threats, but it wasn't. It was on Reese Calder. He remembered the subtle pressure of her hand at the gala, the unwavering certainty in her gaze, the fact that she didn't try to charm him or impress him like the other women who flocked around his world. She was impossible to read. That alone was infuriating, and yet it drew him in. Gideon's phone buzzed. A message from Nora. "She's arrived. Conference room B." He exhaled sharply. This would be the first real interaction since the gala. He wasn't sure he wanted it to be formal or anything at all. Reese entered, eyes forward, stride confident. She didn't smile. She didn't acknowledge him beyond a nod. Professional, distant, untouchable. "Good morning, Miss Calder," Gideon said. His voice was neutral, but beneath it was a taut thread of curiosity he didn't dare admit. "Morning, sir," she replied, keeping her tone level, eyes on the floor just long enough to assert independence. They sat across from each other at the polished oak conference table. Reese placed her hands lightly on the table, fingers interlocked, and waited. Gideon observed her like a predator would study its prey, but he wasn't sure who was hunting whom anymore. The room was quiet, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. "I've performed exceptionally last night," Gideon said finally, breaking the silence. "I'd expected competence. What I didn't expect was efficiency under pressure, calm where most people panic." "Thank you," Reese said evenly, withholding any hint of pride. "It's part of the job." "Part of the job," he echoed, almost a challenge. "Most people would have frozen. You acted instinctively, precisely, without hesitation." Reese looked at him briefly, eyes sharp. "Instincts come from training, observation, and preparation, not from emotion." Gideon's jaw tightened. He didn't like how easily she put distance between them, even after saving his life. And yet he respected it. Her refusal to lean on charm or vulnerability was infuriating and magnetic at once. For a few moments, neither spoke, just the faint hum of the building, the distant click of keyboards, and the soft vibration of security alarms in the back offices. "I need to know I can trust you," Gideon said finally, leaning forward. "Not just with the job, but with me." Reese's eyes narrowed. Trust isn't given lightly, not in my line of work. Not in mine either, he said sharply.
The silence returned, heavier this time. Their emotional sparks from the gala threatened to ignite, but both of them pulled back, wary. Reese didn't want to become emotionally entangled with a billionaire whose world she couldn't control. Gideon didn't want to expose vulnerability to someone whose presence unsettled the walls he had built around his heart. They both wanted the other and feared it. "You make a lot of assumptions about me," Reese said, voice calm but edged. "You assume I'm unafraid. You assume I'm indifferent. You assume I'll do what you want simply because you're you. And you assume I'm some man who needs saving," Gideon replied evenly, though a flicker of frustration broke through. "You assume I need control, that I never take risk." Reese's lips pressed into a line. She didn't argue, she didn't look away, she just waited, measured, letting the unspoken words hang. Gideon realized he'd underestimated her. She wasn't naive, she wasn't impressionable, she wasn't just a bodyguard. She was a mirror of everything he thought he controlled, and he hated that reflection, but also craved it. "I don't get close to people," he admitted finally, voice low. "They make mistakes, they get careless, they betray me." "Then keep your distance," Reese said, plainly. "I'm not here to be your friend, I'm here to do my job, and I will." Her words should have stung, but they didn't. Instead, they ignited a different kind of tension, a grudging respect, and something else he wasn't ready to name. Gideon's fingers drummed on the table. He wanted to reach across and defy her boundary. He wanted to test her, see if she'd cracked under pressure, emotionally, mentally. But he didn't. Not yet. "I still don't get close to people," he admitted finally, voice low. "They make mistakes. They get careless. They betray me." "Then keep your distance," Reese said, plainly. "I'm not here to be your friend." "You saved me," he said finally, quieter this time. "I don't say that lightly. Most people—" He stopped himself. Reese's sharp gaze made him reconsider. "Wouldn't have." Her expression softened, only slightly. "I did what was necessary." "Yes, you did. That's precisely why I can't ignore you." The words lingered between them, unspoken but heavy. Reese stiffened, subtly, pulling back into herself. She refused to let this thread of vulnerability unravel. Gideon noticed the tiny movement. It made him want to push harder, but he didn't. He restrained himself, just as she restrained herself. For both of them, the emotional resistance was real. Gideon's pride and instinct for control clashed against the stirrings of curiosity and admiration. Reese's professionalism and fear of attachment clashed against the undeniable connection forged in moments of danger. Neither wanted to surrender first, and so they remained suspended in tension, each aware of the other's skill, courage, and presence, but unwilling to yield emotionally. Finally, Reese stood. "I'll be conducting routine security sweeps today. If you need me, I'll be in the West Wing monitoring systems." Gideon watched her go, every step measured, every motion composed. He wanted to call her back. He wanted to ask her to stay, but he didn't. Pride, habit, and fear held him back. Yet as she disappeared down the hall, he realized something alarming. The more he resisted her, the more he noticed her. The more he ignored the pull, the stronger it became. And that, Gideon knew, was dangerous. Now, I want to ask you, if you are Gideon or Reese, would you give in to the growing attraction or resist and maintain control? Drop your answer in the comments. What would you do in their place?
The storm came without warning, a late autumn tempest that transformed the city streets into slick rivers of rushing water. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Flood warnings flashed on every digital screen.
The gala disaster had left its mark, and now the city was punishing anyone daring enough to move through it. Reese Calder had planned to spend the morning conducting routine sweeps. Gideon Vance had other plans, a series of meetings that could not be postponed. But when they both attempted to leave the building, the streets were impassable. Cars stalled in ankle-deep water, bridges closed, and lightning cut across the sky like white-hot knives. "Sir," Reese said firmly, adjusting her jacket against the driving rain, "we can't go out there. It's unsafe." "I have meetings," Gideon replied sharply, though he hesitated as the wind tore at his overcoat. "I don't cancel for, not for weather, for danger," Reese interrupted. "And yes, sir, this qualifies. We wait inside." He stared at her, frustrated. She wasn't just challenging him, she was insisting on a boundary he didn't often encounter. Most people caved to his authority immediately. Reese didn't. "Fine," he muttered, finally relenting. "We wait." The lobby was empty except for them, the storm keeping everyone else inside offices or cars. The tall glass windows rattled as thunder cracked overhead. Lightning illuminated Reese's face in harsh, fleeting bursts. She looked calm, composed, professional, but there was something undeniably vulnerable in the way she pulled her jacket tighter around her. Gideon's pulse quickened, not from fear of the storm, not entirely. He couldn't explain why her presence had suddenly become magnetic, her proximity to him like a live wire, each movement pulling him closer despite his resistance. "Reese," he began, testing the water, "stay close. Just stay near me while we monitor the storm." Her eyes flicked to him, a subtle eyebrow raise. "Sir?" "Don't argue," he said, voice low. "I need to be able to react instantly if— You mean if someone tries to harm you again," she finished, completing the thought he hadn't spoken. He froze at her accuracy. The way she anticipated his needs unsettled him, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he walked a few paces toward the security console, leaving her just close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Hours passed as the storm raged. They were trapped together in the quiet, dimly lit control room. Reese monitored the flood of alerts on the screens, calling out updates in calm, clipped tones. Gideon remained nearby, hands behind his back, body tense but unyielding. They hadn't spoken more than a few words outside of duty, yet the air between them thrummed with unspoken energy. Each glance, each small movement was loaded with tension neither could fully name. Gideon noticed how Reese's hair had become slightly damp at the nape of her neck, the way her eyes, sharp and alert, softened for a split second when she caught a particularly strong gust rattling the building, the subtle inhale before she spoke her next report. All of it chipped away at the walls he had built around himself.
"Sir?" Reese said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence. "We should check the generator backup. There's a risk the main system will fail under these conditions." Gideon nodded. "Lead the way." They walked side by side through the maintenance corridors. The storm's roar outside was deafening. Pipes vibrated, dripping water at random intervals, and every step echoed through the empty halls. They were forced closer together than usual, brushing shoulders, elbows, even hands accidentally as they maneuvered around puddles and uneven flooring. Neither moved away. Neither acknowledged the closeness. And yet, both felt it, electric, dangerous, undeniable. Reese opened the generator room. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the cramped, metal-lined space. She gestured for him to stand back. Gideon did, though a fraction too close, drawn to the sharp angles of her face, the steady rhythm of her breathing. The generator sputtered, shuddered, then came to life with a loud roar. Reese stepped back, brushing a wet strand of hair from her eyes. Gideon's gaze followed the motion, lingering a moment too long. "You're meticulous," he said quietly, almost as if speaking aloud would make it true. Most people wouldn't even think about the airflow through the vent shafts or the pressure on the main valve. You think of everything. Someone has to, she replied evenly. Otherwise, people get hurt. Her eyes met his briefly. There was a flicker there, a hesitation, a recognition of the intimacy forced upon them by circumstance. But Reese masked it quickly, retreating behind her professional barrier. The hours dragged on. The storm showed no sign of easing. Power flickered. The emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie red glow. Gideon noticed how Reese moved with a fluid, controlled precision that seemed almost effortless, and he realized that watching her in motion was unsettlingly captivating. He didn't want to admit it, but he wanted to protect her, not because it was his duty, but because he couldn't bear the thought of harm coming to her. For her part, Reese kept her emotions carefully locked away. But she felt the pull of proximity too, the subtle warmth of his presence, the quiet confidence that radiated from him even when he tried not to show it. Her professional focus wavered for a heartbeat as she realized she was aware of more than just the storm and the threat. They shared silence, punctuated only by the storm and the hum of machines. A strange camaraderie formed in the forced proximity. Not friendship, not trust. Not yet. Something rawer, undefined. Eventually, the storm subsided enough that it was safe to leave. The city streets were still slick, but the floodwaters had receded slightly. They returned to the lobby in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Gideon stopped before the exit doors. He glanced at Reese. "You didn't have to stay so close," he said softly, more of an observation than a reprimand. "I did," she said simply, eyes forward, "because it's my job, and because if anyone tried to get to you, I couldn't risk being anywhere else." The honesty, the weight of it, the subtle vulnerability, it struck him harder than any physical threat ever could. He swallowed, wanting to say more, to reach out, to bridge the distance that had formed between them after the gala. But he didn't. Not yet. And that, Gideon realized, was the danger of forced proximity. It revealed cracks in the armor he had built over a lifetime. It revealed emotions he wasn't ready to confront. But it also revealed something else. Connection. Even if both of them resisted it, the bond had begun. The morning after the storm, the office hummed with the soft buzz of computers and muted chatter. But in Gideon Vance's corner of Vance Tech, silence reigned. The storm had shifted something, not in the city, but in him. He could no longer ignore the pull Reese Calder had on him, the way her presence unsettled the meticulous control he had spent decades building. Reese entered, clipboard in hand, expression as calm and unreadable as ever. Yet today there was a subtle tension in her eyes, a hint of fatigue that spoke of more than long hours on the job. "Sir," she said, voice clipped as usual, "the cameras flagged unusual activity in the East Wing overnight. I checked personally. Nothing missing, nothing damaged, but someone was inside." Gideon nodded, impressed but not surprised. "You move through the building like a shadow." She didn't respond, which was normal. Silence was her armor. He studied her anyway, the braid at the nape of her neck, the taut line of her jaw, the faint scar along her right forearm. He had noticed it before, but never asked. Now he felt compelled to. "Reese," he said carefully, "that scar, how did you get it?" Her eyes flicked toward him, guarded. For a heartbeat, something flickered, vulnerability, almost invisible. "A training accident," she said. "Nothing serious." Gideon sensed she wasn't telling the whole truth, and that sparked a mix of curiosity and frustration within him. He didn't pry immediately. He waited,
letting her decide whether to reveal more. Hours passed. The threat in the East Wing was minor, but the tension between them grew. Gideon couldn't help but observe her every movement. He realized that every step she took, every decision she made, was shaped by more than just professionalism. It was shaped by history, experience, and survival. Finally, in a quiet moment, Gideon leaned forward in his chair. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but I need to understand why you do what you do with such precision and why it feels like nothing can touch you." Reese's hand paused over her clipboard. Her eyes met his for a brief second, steady, guarded, but then she exhaled and lowered her gaze. "My family," she began softly, voice almost lost under the hum of the office, "wasn't safe when I was growing up. My parents, they didn't survive an incident I can't fully explain. I was left to care for my younger sisters. I had to learn fast. I had to be precise. I had to survive." Gideon's sharp eyes softened imperceptibly. He had seen loss, yes. He had felt betrayal and disappointment, but this weight of responsibility at such a young age was something entirely different. "I became skilled because if I wasn't, my sisters wouldn't have had a chance. Every risk I take now, every decision I make is calculated to keep others safe. Not to impress anyone, not to gain favor, just safe." Gideon leaned back, absorbing every word. The armor he had built around himself, the careful walls of wealth, power, and control, suddenly seemed less sufficient. Here was a woman who had built her own armor through fire, loss, and responsibility, and she wasn't seeking his validation. He realized then that the attraction he felt wasn't merely physical. It wasn't about novelty or charm. It was respect, awe, connection to someone who had faced danger he had only ever analyzed intellectually. "You carry a lot of weight," he said quietly. "Most people would crumble under it." "I don't crumble," Reese replied evenly. "I endure. I adapt. That's the difference." For a moment, silence returned. But this silence was heavier than before, charged with unspoken understanding. Gideon realized that he hadn't just been intrigued by her strength, he was being challenged by it. And he didn't like how much he wanted to rise to that challenge. Then came his own revelation, quiet, almost unintentional. Gideon's past was not without shadows. He hadn't shared it with anyone, not Nora, not the board, not a single employee. And yet, in this quiet office, facing Reese Kelder, he felt the need to admit a fragment of it. "I was betrayed once," he said quietly. "Not by an enemy, by someone I trusted completely. I lost everything I had worked for at that point. Wealth, position, control, it all vanished in a day. I built it back, brick by brick, but since then I've never allowed anyone in close enough to hurt me again." Reese studied him, noting the rare vulnerability. It mirrored her own hidden fears, trust, loss, and the constant vigilance required to survive. "So you hide behind control," she said softly, almost a statement, not a question. "I survive behind control," Gideon corrected. "There's a difference." Her eyes softened slightly, the first real hint of connection since their first meeting. "We survive behind control, but maybe, sometimes, survival isn't enough." The words hung between them, heavy and unresolved. Then the storm outside reminded them of reality, a minor security breach, a false alarm, but the tension had shifted. It was no longer only professional. Something unspoken, yet tangible, threaded through the room. Gideon found himself studying her again, the scars, the posture, the unwavering gaze, and he realized something alarming. He wanted to know more, not as an employer or a client, but as a man drawn to someone he had been trying to resist. Reese, on the other hand, felt the pull, but resisted. She couldn't allow herself to be drawn in, not fully. Vulnerability was a luxury she had never afforded herself. Not for a man, even one as compelling, dangerous, and enigmatic as Gideon Vance. But as she glanced at him, catching the rare softness in his eyes, she felt a flutter she hadn't anticipated. It was brief, fleeting, almost dangerous, but it was there. The room fell silent again, both aware that the forced proximity, the storm, the shared danger, and the unveiled histories had created a bond neither was ready to acknowledge fully. But one thing was certain. They were no longer strangers. And the past they carried, loss, betrayal, responsibility, was threading them together in ways they couldn't yet understand. Gideon broke the silence at last, his voice quieter than usual. "You don't have to trust me. Not yet. But I need you to know I see you. I understand more than you think." Reese's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see you too, but understanding isn't the same as trusting." He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary, though it didn't ease the tug of connection he felt. The weight of their pasts, the exposure of wounds, and the shared acknowledgement of loss had shifted the landscape of their relationship. What had begun as a professional necessity was now intertwined with something deeper, more fragile, and infinitely more dangerous, the possibility of real connection. And both of them knew it.
The late afternoon sun filtered through the office windows, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floors of Vance Tech. After days of storms, both literal and emotional, the air felt quieter, almost safe, for the first time in what felt like weeks. Reese Calder sat at the corner of the conference room, quietly reviewing the security reports from the gala and the storm. Gideon Vance approached, coffee in hand, careful not to startle her. She glanced up, offering a subtle nod. No words yet. She wasn't ready for small talk. "I made coffee," he said, placing the cup on the table beside her. "You don't drink much, do you?" "She drink what's necessary," she replied evenly, but her lips twitched slightly, almost a smile, the faintest acknowledgement of humor. He took a seat opposite her. "I noticed something during the storm," he said quietly. "You don't just protect people, you calm them. Even when the situation is chaotic, your presence steadies the room, me included." Her eyes flicked to his, sharp and unreadable. "You're exaggerating." "No," he countered softly. "I don't exaggerate. I observe. And I noticed how people respond to you. Even me." Reese's fingers traced the edge of a report. "She does my job," she said, tone neutral, but the vulnerability behind the words slipped through like a faint current. "You do more than that," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You create order where there's chaos. You bring safety where there's fear, and you do it without needing praise or recognition." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not tense this time. Different. Calm. Almost comforting. Reese exhaled softly. "You make it sound poetic," she said, voice quieter than usual. "I don't think of it that way." "Maybe you should," Gideon said, eyes steady, "because it matters." Something shifted then, a crack in the armor that both had maintained since their first meeting. The storm, the forced proximity, the near disaster at the gala, and the brief revelations of past wounds had created a fragile trust. And now they were stepping closer to each other, emotionally, without fully acknowledging it. "I don't usually let people see me," Reese admitted, "but I suppose you've seen more than anyone else in a long time." Gideon's gaze softened. "And I don't take that lightly. I won't exploit it. I just want to understand, that's all." A faint warmth spread through Reese's chest. She hadn't expected it. This rare, slow-building sense of connection. She had trained herself to rely only on instincts, on precision, on control. Not feelings, not trust, not admiration. And yet here it was,
quietly threading its way through her defenses. "You're unusual," she said finally. "Most people in your world, they try to manipulate, impress, or intimidate. You don't. Because I don't need to. Except maybe I need you." Her eyes flicked up sharply, catching the meaning in his tone. She looked away, pretending to read the report in front of her, but the faint blush along her cheek betrayed her. She was aware of the pull between them, the subtle magnetism that neither could deny.
They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought. Gideon took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving her. Reese tapped her pen lightly against the paper, the rhythm almost meditative. Then Gideon spoke again, softer this time. "Do you ever let yourself rest? Not just physically, but emotionally?" Reese paused. She had trained herself to compartmentalize pain, fear, and vulnerability, but in the quiet of this shared moment, the question caught her off guard. "Rest isn't safe," she said finally. "Not when people rely on you, not when you've lost everything before." Gideon's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He knew that feeling well. Loss, betrayal, and fear of attachment were constants in his life too. "Maybe rest isn't safe, but it's necessary. Otherwise we become hollow." Reese's eyes met his for a long, suspended second. Neither spoke, but both understood. The shared acknowledgement of pain and survival formed an invisible bond. Then something lighter broke through. Reese allowed herself a small laugh, almost involuntary. "You talk like a therapist, and I'm supposed to be the stoic bodyguard." Gideon's lips quirked upward. "Maybe you need a reminder that even the stoic needs someone who sees them." It was the first real smile she had allowed herself in front of him, and he noticed. The way her eyes softened, the slight ease in her posture. She wasn't letting her guard down completely, but she was letting him see a fragment of her humanity. The afternoon stretched on. They reviewed reports, planned strategies, and moved through the building together. And with each shared glance, each brief brush of hands while passing equipment, the emotional bond deepened. Neither could ignore it. Reese realized she trusted him. Not entirely, not fully, but enough to allow herself a fraction of ease she hadn't felt in years. And Gideon realized he was drawn to her not because of her loyalty or skill, but because of the strength and resilience she carried within herself. For the first time since they met, the tension between them was no longer solely a battle of resistance. It was a delicate dance of connection, mutual recognition of vulnerability, respect, and attraction. By the end of the day, the office was quiet. The storm had long passed, leaving the city drenched but calm. Reese and Gideon lingered near the entrance, neither wanting to leave the other just yet. "I should go," Reese said finally, voice low, almost hesitant. Gideon nodded, but didn't move. "Do you want to?" he asked quietly, letting the question hang without pressure. Reese considered. She had learned to resist impulses, to prioritize duty over emotion. But the pull was strong. She shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she admitted. And in that moment, the bond solidified. A fragile, tentative connection, but one built on shared experience, trust, and a recognition of the hearts they both guarded fiercely. It was temporary, fleeting, but it was real. The office buzzed with urgent activity, a tension that felt heavier than any storm outside. Vance Tech was under attack, figuratively and financially. Rumors of a hostile takeover spread like wildfire. Emails from panicked employees flooded in, and the board demanded immediate updates. Gideon Vance strode into the operations center, sharp, commanding. But there was a storm in his chest, one no one else could see. He had prepared for attacks on his company, but not for the possibility that the most personal thread in his life, Reese Calder, might be pulled into the chaos and misinterpreted. Reese was at the security console, eyes scanning surveillance footage from the gala and the storm aftermath. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, reviewing access logs and alert histories with precision. Gideon approached silently, watching her work. There was no time for pleasantries, no room for subtlety. Then it happened. An alert popped up, a flagged image of Reese in the company's restricted East Wing during the early hours. Gideon froze, heart thumping with disbelief. The footage suggested she had accessed a secure area without clearance during the period when nothing should have triggered an alarm. "Reese," he said sharply, his voice carrying across the room. "Explain this." She didn't look up immediately, continuing to scan the footage as if he hadn't spoken. "It's nothing," she said, calm, too calm. "I just accessed a maintenance panel. Routine check. No breach, no threat." Gideon's jaw tightened. "The log says otherwise. Security flagged it. That's not routine." She paused, finally meeting his gaze. "You think I'd sabotage your company? After everything? Then why the secrecy?" he demanded, voice rising. "Why weren't you upfront about it?" "Because I didn't think you needed to know," she snapped, the first crack in her controlled demeanor. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, betraying the emotional storm beneath. "I'm here to protect, not to report every minor move I make." The air between them became charged, every heartbeat a spark. Gideon's eyes narrowed, his trust fracturing under the weight of the perceived betrayal. "You've lied to me, Reese," he said, finally, voice low, tight with betrayal. "I trusted you." "I haven't lied," she yelled, stepping back. "I've done exactly what I promised. I've protected you. I've protected this company. And now, because you misread a log, you think I'm your enemy?" Gideon's hands trembled, though he clenched his fists to hide it. "I can't ignore this," he said, teeth grinding. "Not with what's at stake. If you're compromised—" "I am not compromised!" Reese shouted, her voice breaking, a mix of anger and anguish. "Why can't you see that? Why do you assume the worst?"
The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, both of them stood exposed, not just to each other, but to the truth of their fears and insecurities. Gideon's voice softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Because I've been betrayed before," he admitted quietly, "and I can't allow it again. Not with you, not with anyone." Reese's eyes glistened. "Then you're letting your past dictate your present," she said softly, voice cracking. "You're punishing me for what someone else did. You're punishing me for being human." He couldn't respond. Words failed him. The trust they had painstakingly built over days, the fragile bond formed in storms and shared vulnerability, shattered in an instant. For Reese, the pain was sharp. She had allowed herself to hope, just slightly, that he could see beyond his walls, that he could recognize the truth without suspicion, without accusation. But he hadn't, and now the distance between them felt insurmountable. Gideon turned away, pacing, trying to control the surge of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. He wanted to call her back, to apologize, to clarify, but pride and fear held him in place. He couldn't let go of the suspicion entirely, not yet. Reese retreated to the security console, fingers trembling, eyes fixed on the blinking screens. She wanted to scream, to run, to leave him and his world behind. But something anchored her, something that whispered that despite the anger, despite the betrayal, despite the emotional chaos, she couldn't completely walk away. For both of them, the emotional cost was real. The bond they had started to form now lay in ruins. Every shared glance, every quiet moment of connection, every laugh, every hint of vulnerability erased by misunderstanding, fear,
and the ghosts of past pain. Gideon's voice finally broke the silence again, quieter, almost resigned. "I need time," he said. I can't deal with this right now, not with my judgment clouded by emotion." Reese nodded, barely able to look at him. "I understand," she whispered. But the words were hollow. Understanding didn't erase the sting, didn't heal the rupture in trust. He left the room, the click of the door behind him echoing like a final punctuation to the first major fracture in their connection. Reese sat alone, staring at the monitors. She felt the weight of disappointment and hurt settle deep in her chest. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to fully acknowledge it. She wanted Gideon Vance, not his wealth, not his power, but the man beneath the armor, and he had just hurt her in a way that left her questioning everything. The room was silent, yet the emotional storm within both of them raged with a fury that could not be ignored. Neither knew how to repair it yet. Neither wanted to admit how much they still cared, how much they had started to depend on the bond they had formed. But both knew, in the quiet aftermath of this shatter point, that the choices made in the next hours or days would determine whether their connection survived or ended for good. If you were Gideon or Reese, how would you handle this kind of betrayal or misunderstanding? Would you walk away or try to repair the bond? Comment below with what you'd do. The office was empty, the late evening lights casting a muted glow across the polished floors. Vance Tech was quiet for the first time in days, the storm of the corporate world momentarily calmed. But inside Gideon Vance's mind, chaos raged. He leaned against the edge of his mahogany desk, staring at the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. The argument with Reese still echoed in his mind, sharp and unforgiving. He had wanted control, certainty, and loyalty. But he had nearly lost the one person who had challenged him in ways no one else ever could. He could feel her absence like a physical weight. The empty office felt colder, larger, lonelier. The choice was clear: retreat into his protective walls or risk vulnerability. Meanwhile, Reese Calder walked the empty halls, reviewing surveillance footage for the 100th time. She was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. The trust she had begun to give Gideon had been met with accusation and suspicion. The bond they shared, fragile and precious, had been shattered. But as she paused to look at the view of the city from the 48th floor, she realized something dangerous. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The tension, the chemistry, the shared vulnerabilities, they haunted her, even now. She sank into a chair near the windows, gripping the armrests. "I can't let this break me," she whispered to herself. But deep down she knew she would regret walking away without trying to mend the connection. Gideon's mind replayed every detail of their last interaction: the accusation, her defensive posture, and the fleeting vulnerability she had let slip. He had nearly destroyed what was forming between them. And yet, the thought of not trying, of letting pride dictate his actions, felt intolerable. He made a decision. Pride would no longer govern him. Hesitation would no longer hold him back. Vulnerability was terrifying, but staying silent would cost him far more. He picked up his phone and typed a message. "Meet me in the rooftop garden, now." Reese felt the vibration in her pocket and read the message. Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at the text, emotions roiling: anger, frustration, longing, and something she didn't want to admit, hope. She took a deep breath, smoothed her uniform, and made her way to the rooftop. The city skyline stretched before her, lights twinkling like distant stars, the remnants of the storm clouds still drifting across the sky. Gideon was there, leaning against the railing, coat collar up against the chill, eyes fixed on the horizon. When he saw her, he straightened, and for the first time in days, he let himself feel the full weight of what had happened between them. "Reese," he said, steady but low, carrying the gravity of the moment. I mishandled everything. I let suspicion get in the way of what matters." Her eyes met his, guarded but curious. "You accused me?" she said softly, the hurt in her voice barely concealed. "And I shouldn't have," he admitted. "You've been honest, precise, and unwavering. And I let my fear dictate my actions. I don't want to do that anymore. Not with you." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Fear," she repeated. "You think fear explains betrayal?" "Not fear of you," he said, stepping closer. "Fear of losing someone who matters. Fear of letting someone in and being hurt. Fear of letting myself care."
The honesty in his tone, the vulnerability he allowed himself, broke through the last of her defenses. Reese felt a trembling in her chest, a mixture of relief, frustration, and longing. She had wanted him to acknowledge the truth, to step past pride and suspicion, and he was doing exactly that. She began, voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to walk away. I almost did. But I realized I can't. I shouldn't. Not when there's something real here, something worth risking." Gideon's eyes softened. He reached out, a cautious, deliberate motion, and touched her hand. The contact was brief, but electric. Both flinched slightly, aware of the intimacy, but not recoiling. "This is your choice," Gideon said quietly, gripping her hand lightly. "You can walk away, or you can let yourself trust me. Let yourself feel what's real, not just what's safe." Reese swallowed, heart pounding. She had spent years building walls, protecting herself, and prioritizing duty over emotion. But in this moment, she felt the truth she had tried to deny. She wanted him, not just the billionaire, not just the employer, but Gideon Vance, the man who had challenged her, protected her, and now stood vulnerable before her. She began, finally, voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I choose to trust you." Gideon's hand tightened slightly over hers, a silent affirmation. "And I choose you," he said, voice low, almost reverent, "not because I have to, not because it's convenient, but because I want to, because this," he gestured between them, "is worth the risk." The tension of the past days, the storm, the argument, the mistrust, dissolved in the quiet honesty of the moment. They stood together, hands intertwined, emotions laid bare, neither hiding behind armor or pride. For a long moment, they simply breathed together, acknowledging the depth of what they had just chosen. The rooftop was quiet, the city lights glittering below, and the aftermath of the storm casting a peaceful glow across the skyline. Gideon finally let the small smile touch his lips. "We're not perfect," he said quietly, "and we'll have challenges. But we face them together. Agreed?" Reese nodded, a hint of a smile forming. "Agreed." In that choice, vulnerable, deliberate, and courageous, they began to rebuild what had been shattered. Trust replaced suspicion, connection replaced isolation, and love, unexpected
but undeniable, found its way into the spaces they had once thought untouchable.
The morning sunlight spilled through the Vance Tech atrium, casting a warm glow over the bustling office. The storm of the past days, both literal and emotional, had passed, leaving clarity, calm, and a sense of renewal in its wake. Gideon Vance moved through the office with purpose, but there was a lightness to his step that had not existed before. Weeks of tension, miscommunication, and withheld emotions had been replaced by resolve and connection. He wasn't just the CEO anymore. He was a man ready to embrace something real, something that transcended wealth, power, and prestige. Reese Calder stood near the security monitors, scanning the latest footage. But unlike before, her posture was relaxed, her sharp gaze softened by confidence, ease, and the quiet awareness that she was now no longer alone in guarding not only the company, but the man she had come to care for. Their eyes met across the room, and a subtle, unspoken smile passed between them. No words were needed. The bond they had forged, tested, and rebuilt radiated between them like a current too strong to ignore. Gideon approached her, footsteps measured yet deliberate. "Morning," he said, voice low but warm. Reese looked up, the hint of a playful smile on her lips. "Morning, sir." He arched an eyebrow, a faint teasing edge in his tone. "Sir?" She shrugged, expression mock solemn, but I suppose some titles are hard to escape. Gideon chuckled, the sound rich and genuine. It echoed through the atrium, drawing the attention of a few employees, though none dared interrupt. The moment belonged solely to them. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly, stopping just beside her. "I don't think I realized how much I needed someone like you in my life." Reese felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but didn't look away. "And I didn't realize I could let someone in, not just as an employer, but as a person, not just to protect, but to care." Gideon's gaze softened, eyes locking with hers. The storm, the betrayal, the shatterpoint, all of it felt distant now, replaced by clarity. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We faced the storm together," he said quietly, "not just the one outside, but the one within ourselves. And we survived it, stronger." Her fingers grazed his hand, hesitant but deliberate. "Stronger," she echoed, "together." They stood like that for a long moment, allowing the weight of the past to dissolve in the warmth of the present. The office around them faded, the hum of computers and footsteps distant background noise, to a scene that felt almost timeless. Then Gideon smiled, a small, wry curl of lips that carried the remnants of his old charm, but softened with vulnerability. "You know, I've rejected many people in my life. Stunning women, ambitious colleagues, charming acquaintances, but none of them ever made me feel what you do." Reese's breath caught, a fluttering mix of pride, relief, and anticipation. She had never heard anyone speak with such sincerity, and the truth of his words resonated deep within her. "You're not like anyone else, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Her chest tightened with emotion, and for the first time she let herself fully acknowledge the love that had been growing, carefully, quietly, beneath her professional composure. "I can't imagine my life without you either," she whispered. Gideon reached for her hand, intertwining fingers with hers. The contact was firm, grounding, and filled with unspoken promises. He leaned slightly closer, eyes never leaving hers. "Reese Calder," he said softly, reverently, "will you let me in? Truly?" Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile, a smile that radiated relief, affection, and desire. "Yes," she said, steady, heart racing. "Yes, Gideon, I will." The tension, the doubts, the past wounds, All of it fell away in that simple, powerful affirmation. Later that evening, the rooftop garden bore witness to a quiet, tender moment. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling like distant stars. The memory of the storm, the forced proximity, and the confrontation in the East Wing lingered only as reminders of how far they had come. Gideon reached for Reese's hand, intertwining fingers with hers. The contact was firm, grounding, and filled with unspoken promises. He leaned slightly closer, eyes never leaving hers. "Reese Calder," he said softly, reflectively. "I know life won't always be this calm, but I promise, I'll face every storm with you." Reese squeezed his hand gently. "And I promise to face it with you. Even when it's hard, even when it hurts, we survive better together." They stopped at the edge of the garden, overlooking the city. Gideon pulled Reese close, a subtle, protective motion that conveyed more than words ever could. She rested her head against his chest, letting the warmth of his presence reassure her. The central event that had first brought them together, the gala incident, the storm, the unexpected proximity, echoed in their shared understanding. It had been the catalyst, the turning point, the trial by fire that had revealed their true selves. And now, with trust rebuilt, vulnerabilities embraced, and love acknowledged, they were transformed. Gideon lifted her chin gently, eyes locking with hers, and spoke softly, but firmly. Us. This is unexpected, but it's real, and I won't let it go." Reese smiled, a full, radiant expression that spoke of relief, hope, and love finally realized. "Yes," she said. "Let's make it real." They kissed, slow, deliberate, filled with the weight of the days behind them and the promise of tomorrow. It wasn't just passion. It was trust, understanding, and the acknowledgement that they had chosen each other despite fear, doubt, and the storms that life had thrown their way. As they pulled back slightly, hands still intertwined, Gideon whispered, "Unexpected love. The best kind, isn't it?" Reese chuckled softly, eyes twinkling. "The only kind worth having." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rooftop. Below, the city continued its endless rhythm. But above, in the quiet garden, two hearts had found a home in each other. They stood there a long while, savoring the calm, the connection, and the knowledge that the trials of the past had forged something unbreakable. The storm had passed, but its memory remained as a reminder of resilience, growth, and the enduring power of unexpected love. Do you believe love is stronger when it's unexpected and tested by challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments. What lessons did you take from Gideon and Reese's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might help someone else understand the power of trust, courage, and unexpected love. If stories like this move you, make sure to follow our channel for more heart-touching journeys that remind us why taking a chance on love can change everything.
Thank you so much for watching Gideon and Reese's story all the way to the end. I hope it touched your heart as deeply as it did theirs. We have many more incredible stories waiting for you, so go ahead and click the video on your screen to discover the next unforgettable tale. You won't want to miss it.